It's hopeless, you just don't get a transfer because you're in a town block.
It's not like when it was Bermondsey, when we were spending their money on the right things, looking after the people. They're not now, they spend it on a lot of old crap.
You never seem to get any satisfaction there, and with the organisation there, you know, you don't get that at all, you know, when you're taking complaints.
So there is no answer really. Nobody cares.
The London Borough of Southwark has one of the largest housing stocks in the country. 62,000 properties, 7 out of every 10 homes are council-owned. A large proportion of this property is made up of flats, either built before the Second World War or started in the 1960s as part of the government's slum clearance programmes. Two things categorise these properties. The pre-war estates are, not surprisingly, showing signs of wear and tear, whilst the post-60s estates were rushed into to satisfy the numbers game. Estates such as the Aylesbury, the largest single municipal housing scheme ever undertaken in Europe, were built because of government incentives and cash help with little regard for the disastrous consequences of coupling architects' fashionable dreams with cheap industrialised construction schemes. It seemed the vision was of these estates nestling into the hills above the Mediterranean coast on a beautiful summer's day. Helen O'Brien, Celia Redknapp and Phyllis Mullins live on typical examples of these unhappy experiments. What do they see as the problems tenants daily face?
There's got a lot of flats empty on the estate and they tell you that it's not allocated, it's pre-allocated so you can't move in. And I don't think that's right. I mean, if someone moves out today, it should still be all right for someone to move in the next day. They leave it empty for months, then it gets vandalised and they complain about it getting vandalised. But if they put people in there, they wouldn't have that problem, really.
A constant one is the battle from one day to the next with repairs. And, for example, if you live in a block of flats with a lift, you're straight away disadvantaged because you may come home or want to go out and find that no lift is working.
We still have problems with the local housing office. We meet with the council once a month and it's the same old problems coming up time and time again. Well, the organisation in the local housing office is not what it should be. We need more estate officers to cover the estate.
Steve Marsling, who lives on the Tabard Gardens estate, acknowledges the dissatisfaction tenants feel.
Councils aren't popular. They are seen in the eyes of the public as being little Caesars or bureaucrats, and things that seem obvious sometimes to tenants are, for one reason or another, not implemented quickly enough. I don't want to go over the old cliche, yes, it's because of the government cuts, although it is. It's simply because that in the last 5 years, we just had an attack on government spending on housing in one area. We've had them on about 3 or 4 areas. We haven't got the new build, which means that certain places that we wanted to knock down, because I think we've got a lot of properties in this borough that have reached their natural life. We're forced to sort of keep trying to repair these places and patch them up because we just haven't got the money for new builds, so that's another problem.
Inner city authorities, such as Southwark, have special needs for many reasons. In many ways, the borough has been left behind and forgotten. The only people interested in it seem to be speculators who want to build a wall of office blocks along the riverfront and pretend the rest doesn't exist. These special needs were recognised by governments in the shape of subsidies and grants given to inner city authorities. That is, they were. 54% of Southwark Council's total expenditure is spent on housing services. The money comes from rates, rents and government subsidies. Since 1979, the amount the ratepayer contributes, adjusted for inflation, has fallen by £1 million. During this time, the government has also forced council rents up by continually reducing their contribution. Since 1979, it's gone down from 51% to 30%. This at a time when homelessness and inner city housing problems are on the increase, and more, not less, government support is needed. John Sinnock, head of Housing Management Services, explains what the money from the Housing Revenue Account is spent on.
The cost of repairs and maintenance next year will be about £19 million. The cost of servicing our loan debts, and what that really means is paying for the money we've borrowed to build new housing and to maintain our existing housing, will be £60 million, nearly half. The wages element, which I know many tenants believe that in fact is what the majority of their rents go on, is approximately £25 million.
Apart from the housing revenue account, local authorities also borrow from investors, as some for major repairs, maintenance and new building projects. Again, it's the government who says how much. This is called the Housing Investment Programme, and the repayments of this lending make up the debt charges. Out of every £1 you pay into your local rent office, over half goes straight into the city banks to pay these debt charges. Charges brought about by the building schemes of the 1960s, pushed through by government persuasion.
I think there's always been a problem that council housing's been housing on the cheap. There's always been an assumption that it should be as cheap as possible, and that frills and luxuries ought to be left out in order to build as many as fast as can be built.
High density estates should never have been built. It was wrong from the start. Whole communities were destroyed, especially in Southwark, where they pulled down back-to-back terraced houses, which were houses with gardens. I mean, they need a lot of work done to them. Hell of a lot of work. It needed money spent on them at the time, but in the long run, I think it would have been socially better, and it would have saved the council a lot of money.
During part of the 60s, you got extra subsidy for building high-rise flats, and you got more subsidy for the high densities that you built, and therefore there were built-in encouragements for councils to build higher and higher flats rather than to build houses with gardens. The other thing was that the whole housing subsidy policy from central government has always been stop, go, stop, go. I mean, one minute they're saying you've got to build as many houses as you can, and the next minute there's a crisis on and the money starts getting cut back. And that really happened all the way through the 60s and 70s until, I suppose, 79, when you got a government that didn't have any go bit. It was just stop, 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 stop.
In 1979-80, the council was allowed to borrow £54 million. This year, it can only borrow £30.5 million.
We did get considerably less than we asked for, and in fact, we got considerably less than we actually need. It's going to mean what we have been allowed, that flats, houses will stand empty for a lot longer, but we haven't the money to undertake the necessary repairs to bring them back into letting.
From information supplied to the council by tenants' associations, its surveyors and housing officers, a figure of £70 million was submitted to the government as the council's borrowing requirement. It will be allowed to borrow £30.5 million. Of this, £22 million is already committed, which leaves £7 million to be spent on only the most urgent works.
I've never met a Tory MP yet that lives on a council estate. And so what they deem to be a fair rent, what they deem to be a good caretaking service is very different from those that have to put up with it. I think the effects of rate capping will be felt greatly because the council will no longer be able to raise rates, which we never wanted to do in the first place, to make up for the loss of rate support grant. What the government is actually saying is that avenue is no longer open to us, and that they're going to try and force us to make cuts in services. But that leaves us with an almighty problem of where do we raise the money?
How has the borough changed over the years? And what special problems do tenants face living on estates such as the North Peckham?
The social problems are enormous, because when you get people who don't really want to live in this type of housing, they tend to isolate themselves in their dwellings. They don't want to mix. They don't want to build community because the community structure is not there. The district office, is totally unworkable, I think, as far as getting a rapport between tenants and management. It's an us and them situation.
One can understand that tenants are frustrated and do feel from time to time that we haven't performed the service they can reasonably expect. Now, I'm not going to be foolish enough to say, hand on heart, on every occasion we do everything absolutely right. That's untrue. The staff work under increasing pressure. Therefore, it means such pressure does from time to time manifest itself in mistakes. Does from time to time also mean that it manifests itself in frustration. Staff equally feel frustrated themselves.
Through a series of public meetings, the council talked at the problems that the present repairs procedure seems to create. Tony Ritchie, chair of the Housing Committee, was involved.
Thank you. Bye-bye. We have introduced a tenancy agreement that was done in consultation with the tenants movement, chaired by a tenant, which has brought in timetables where repairs have to be done by. Now, if they're not done within that period of time, the tenant has a right under that tenancy agreement to be able to take action for financial reimbursement against the local authority. Tenants aren't always happy with the answer they get from the council. And at the moment they have two options: either accept it or go through a very expensive legal process through the county courts to get what they consider justice. What we have now about to introduce is an independent arbitration service whereby the tenant or the council can go to the arbitration panel and get a decision on a matter of dispute, and that will be made up of a councillor, a representative of the tenants movement and one independent person.
David Main is the Housing Committee councillor responsible for allocations.
Well, the basic criticisms is that we haven't got a very fair or efficient system, and I would agree with them. We've got a system we inherited. It's been built up over a number of years. It's so complicated that only 2 people in the whole council understand it. And that is, let's say, when both our tenants can't understand it and the majority of the officers who are supposed to be operating it don't fully understand it all, it can't possibly be very good. And that is our feeling, and we've decided that we're going to change it. And adopt the basic principles that people must be able to understand it, and that it must be not only fair, but be seen to be fair.
Sharon and Tom Mulligan had good reason to discover the complexities of the transfer system. They were living in a flat on the 12th floor of Draper House. Jamie had just been born when Sharon developed diabetes. They asked for a transfer, which became more urgent when Sharon became pregnant with Scott. Because of Sharon's diabetes, Tom had to take a lot of time off work, nearly losing his job as a result. Being diabetic, did living in a tower block make things difficult?
Yeah, because I was frightened to go out just in case I got stuck in the lift, because you have to eat regular and that.
What did you feel about the treatment that you received from the housing department during this time?
It was quite bad, really, wasn't it? At first, you know.
How was it bad?
Well, every time we would phone them up to ask them what was going on, they just kept putting me off. They said, we're having a meeting on Friday, so I'd phone up Friday. They said, no, the meeting was called off, we're having it next week, and just, they just kept on like that.
Were the housing staff Sharon and Tom were seeing those that dealt with their application? After a series of frustrations and conflicting information, they took up the delay with their councillor, Graham Geddes.
Graham Geddes told us, because I said to him that these estate officers keep promising these places. But he said, well, it's not up to the estate officer, it's up to the allocation officer. But then again, I didn't know that. And I found out that, we'll start again.
But you can't get proof allocations.
I tried. Her nurse tried. Her mum tried. But there's just no way that they speak to the general public.
Eventually, Sharon and Tom were offered a ground floor maisonette in Boundary House, round the corner from Sharon's mum. What difference has this made?
If I have to go in hospital, Tom, my mum, she's only round the corner. She comes round and helps and things like that. You know, it's a lot better living here. And I haven't been in hospital so much since I've lived here.
The new policies, the ones that we hope to be introducing within the next year, firstly we'll have an open transfer system. I mean, forget the artifices that people use to get on our present one. The second thing we'll do, in order to make things understandable, is both give people their points, similarly to now, but probably not exactly the same points, but also we will grade the properties. Now that will actually mean that people will then say, look, I've got 80 points, or whatever it may be. This property in this area, this 3-bedroom flat in sort of Camberwell, needs 87 points. Oh, well, I've only got 80. Do I want to wait several more years and get that far, or do I want to look for something that'll only be 80? Now, it isn't going to produce any more housing, but at least people will know what points they've got and what points they need for different properties in different areas. From our point of view, although it may not be 100% fair all the time, people will actually understand it and they will be able to see what is happening. I won't say they'll all be happy, because all of them won't get what they want, because we haven't got it, but at least it will be seen to be fairer.
Of course, there are problems, and the council is trying to do something about them immediately. They're introducing new procedures to improve the service. The ultimate aim is for the services to be fully decentralised. Councillor Graham Geddes lives on the Browning estate off East Street. He outlines what decentralisation would mean for tenants. Why was it a major issue in the last local government elections?
We were elected to improve the housing services, and I think all members of the council are very aware that housing is the most important issue for people in Southwark at the present time. That's why we have given it priority over all other areas in terms of the resources that we can put into the housing programme.
It's obvious the present system needs radical improvement. This cannot happen overnight. John Sinnock outlines the council's short and long-term proposals.
In the short term, we're looking at two levels or two areas of work. The first is decentralisation decision-making. We are hoping that what many of our staff, and I believe tenants, see as the ivory tower of Rye Lane, that's Housing Department headquarters, will be whittled down to purely a support group which will allow the districts to carry on and make the important day-to-day decisions that affect tenants and housing applicants. The other area we're looking to decentralise is from the district housing offices into further area offices, where each district currently has at least one area office, and to estate officer surgeries. Now I must say this isn't a substitute for decentralisation, but the idea is to bring staff who provide the housing service closer to the tenants. In the ultimate, it's hoped that we will have neighbourhood housing officers where tenants may go in to seek advice and guidance on any matter relating to the housing service in Southwark. It's hoped that these units will be quite close to where tenants live. We're expecting to see eventually 29 such units in the borough.
Southwark Council is trying to improve services by listening to tenants and finding out what they want by way of improved services. For instance, in transfers, repairs, and giving district officers more say in the department's day-to-day running. Tenants will see the effects of these changes and continue to help to create a more accountable service through their input. But what of the future? The problem of little money is seen every day, and deterioration is accelerating. The less money spent now on repairs means so much more will have to be spent in the future. Tony Ritchie feels irreparable damage is being done, not just to the bricks and mortar of Southwark's housing, but to the whole community.
As a council, throughout the whole of the Docklands area, embarked upon a policy in the 70s of acquiring that land from the Port of London Authority to develop a lot of it for low-rise, low-density housing to release the housing densities that we have in London at the present time, and particularly in Southwark. Now, that land would have been a major part of our new build programme. It was our land for building houses like I have around me today, and I'm sorry to keep referring to that, but I think it's a testimony of what local authorities can in actual fact do. Now what's happened, that land has been taken from us by a private development corporation to build houses by private developers and private house builders, taking no account of the housing need and housing interest of the people of the borough. It is purely there to make a profit as fast as they possibly can.
Clearly there is no simple answer to what needs to be done, but there is a simple strategy for tenants who are fed up with being used as pawns by central government in its vendetta against the public sector. That is, to join with the council in saying no, that's enough.
The people of the borough know that we've got a real problem on our hands. We're not going to make redundancies. We're not going to make cuts in services because we weren't elected to do either of those. We're not going to raise the rents, and we cannot raise the rates. We wouldn't want to even if we could. That means that we're going bust. That's what the reality of this is, unless we get the missing millions back from this government. That's going to take a campaign that has to unite every tenant, every ratepayer, every trade unionist in this borough in a united struggle, despite any differences that we've had before. Because if you think we're bad at the moment, think what it's going to be like if we don't actually get that money back, if we can't have the money to pay the wages, if we can't have money for upkeep and care of estates.
I feel that personally that that the Tenants Association and the councillors should stand up against the government, even if the commissioners have to be called in, and that councillors are betraying the people who voted for them when they implement Tory cuts.
I'd like to see tenants actually take to the streets, march, and bring it home to this government.